Welcome, viewers and listeners, to the Thinking Fans Premier League podcast. Each week, we get together with our besties, who are current pro players, real coaches, academics, and stat heads. Today, we're joined by soccer analyst Harshal Patel. Also on the pod is professional footballer Dre Fortune, and I'm host Chris Mumford. Bella ciao. Harshal, you've been watching a lot of matches. What have you been up to otherwise?
Yeah, I mean the the number of games we've been having over the last, I'd say, week or so hasn't really left too much time to do much else. But other than football, I've just been learning how to play the guitar, which is something I've been wanting to do for a while. I bought a guitar sometime last year, but didn't really get around to sitting down and actually learning it properly. But now that, because of the pandemic and the fact that we're mostly at home, I've been able to devote some time to that. So yeah,
So are
that's
you
just
going to
been
be
what I've been doing.
shredding on an electric guitar soon, or are you going to stay focused on the acoustic?
It is acoustic so far, and the only thing that's probably going to get shredded is my fingers, because I'm slowly building up calluses. So
I'll tell you,
at the moment, that's the only thing that's
those
getting shredded.
steel strings,
Yeah.
well kept secret. Start with nylon strings. Dre, what have you been up to over the holiday?
Nothing but training, really, Chris. Just some gym work, training with my dad and my brother, and playing a little bit of pickup.
What does off-season training look like for a professional footballer like yourself?
Well, for me, I try to get in the gym maybe 3 times a week or something like that, and I'll usually double that up with training. I try to get a small group together with a couple like close friends and my brother, and my dad will kind of lead us through some technical work and finishing and stuff like that, and just try to sharpen up certain aspects of our game. And then I enjoy playing pickup every once in a while as well with some guys. So just to stay a little bit sharp and keep playing and whatnot.
Nice. Well, I've been finishing up my book on sports entrepreneurship. That's going to be published by Columbia Business School Press. And I'm just wrapping up on the analytics piece. I actually interviewed the founder of Y-Scout. That was really cool, Mateo. And then also wrapping up the sports betting section, where I interview a professional sports bettor in Las Vegas about how he manages his portfolio. So that's pretty cool. We want to go ahead and get started with the pod. We are sponsored by the Premier League Guide for those mad about football. It's Moneyball for soccer, opposition analysis plus eye candy. The current update is available on www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. So during Matchday 15, we had a weekend littered with 5 draws with some drama, particularly Arsenal, Chelsea, and Tottenham-Wolves. Big Sam returned with a thuggish marker against Liverpool that he is back. And ManCity is quietly going about its business with another pedestrian win against Newcastle. But let's focus on the game that really kind of led the weekend off, which was that Leicester City Man United 2-2 draw. Harshal, help us unpack that match.
A lot of people were billing this game not as a title decider or anything, but maybe as the game that would give us a better sense of who the title challengers for Liverpool could be in a way. If that is the narrative you're looking for, then you didn't really get an answer, because the game finished in a draw, and it was actually quite even. But if you look at the game itself, I think United will be kicking themselves a little bit, because they had, again, it's been a bit of a story with United where they've not been taking their chances in a few games, and that has cost them. Sometimes they have, although they have put together a very impressive run of form away from home. This game against Leicester was the first, I think, in first away game this season that they've not picked up full points from. They dropped points from, and they've actually come back from behind in all of those games to win those games. Over here, they actually took the lead, but then Harvey Barnes equalized. They took the lead again, and then Jamie Vardy equalized again, and it was again, I think, an issue. I would say that Marcus Rashford had a good game, but he could have had a hat trick, and he didn't take his chances. There's again a worrying reliance on Bruno Fernandes. which could be a problem for United if he gets injured or suspended or he's rested for whatever reason. And I thought Vardy again just showed, even though he was not really involved in the game throughout, but that's not really his game. He doesn't need to be involved in the game for the full 90 minutes in terms of touches of the ball or just, linking up and all of that, because he was in the right place at the right time for the goal, for the equalizer that he scored. And that basically boils down what his game is all about. Even though he is getting on in terms of age, he's still scoring. I do think United didn't defend that phase really well. There were players didn't really follow their markers, and Vardy was able to get a bit of space in the penalty area, which you don't really want to give to a player like Vardy. But overall, it just seemed like a good example of where both teams are. They have their flaws, they have their strengths, and all of that came to the fore in this game, and they couldn't really come out on top.
What my take is, Harshal, is it's almost as if the roles were reversed, in that you would think the team that has less money would be sitting back, maybe only have the ball 45% of the time, but it's actually Manchester United that only had possession 45% of the time. And I'm really struck by, I really thought that Leicester felt more on the forefoot on this, and maybe that's a tactical decision. It's still a bit of a disconnect for me to see a team with so much money play so seemingly passively.
Chris, I think that could just basically be down to the fact that Leicester were the home team, and you generally associate the home team with being the more attacking side. And these are, as much as
Harshal, this is Manchester United, okay?
As I was getting to that point, I was just getting to that point, that as much as you would say that Manchester United are expected to dominate possession,
yeah,
I don't think that's the case. I actually don't think that's the case, in the sense that United have shown that their strength under Solskjaer is playing on the counter-attack. So Solskjaer basically tried to set up that situation here.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about Man United is the burden of its history, right? They're second or third in the league. Things are going pretty well. Their commercial revenues are going pretty well, but they are so overburdened with expectations. And the main story that didn't get enough love, as far as I'm concerned, is the old guys are still delivering, namely Vardy and Cavani, right? That assist from Cavani. He comes in for a little bit and he does just enough to make the difference. Dre, what's your take on the game?
Yeah, I kind of, first and foremost, I'd say I don't think Man U necessarily dominating possession is their strong suit at the moment. I think they've been flying on the counterattack, and that's when they seem to, create their best chances. I was very surprised by Rashford not taking a couple of chances. Obviously, the header early on, and then a big save from Schmeichel. You still expect Rashford to score that. But yeah, at the end of the day, I thought Man U would have probably won the game. I thought they were, in my opinion, a little unlucky not to get 3 points from the game, just based on what they created and their work through 90 minutes. But Leicester persevered, and that was the first of 2 times this week that they, come from behind to get a point out of a game. And I think that they're always capable of doing that. They came from behind twice in that game. They're always going to, linger and be in the game based on how they play. So, yeah, no answers really in terms of the top of the table and who's really going to challenge. But I think both teams will stay strong throughout the rest of the year.
So I want to also give a shout out. I think Harvey Barnes did a just a really remarkable job, particularly in the first half. And, he is one of the best in his position, in that he's in the top 20 in terms of successful attacking actions per 90, according to Y-Scout. And we also have to give a shout out to the defense, Ndidi and Fofana. I think, they're 5th and 12th in terms of successful defensive actions. And it was so nice to see Ndidi do his thing. And Fofana it has been a revelation that's really unearthed due to injuries. So it's really nice to see that. And of course, we do have to give the shout out to Wan-Bissaka, who is number one in the league in terms of successful actions defensively. So there were a lot of really interesting pieces that came together, I felt, for Leicester, while as yet for Man United, they did what they needed to do. It would have been nice for Man United or Leicester to pick up the 3 points to get closer to Liverpool, but they had to settle for a draw. So let's turn our attention to the next game of interest, which is Arsenal-Chelsea. Dre, why don't you help us unpack that game?
Gladly. I will gladly do that. I thought Arsenal, to be fair, I'll start with the 3 goals. I thought the first goal was maybe a bit of a soft penalty, but good work from Tierney, who's been solid throughout the entire year. He's been one of the bright spots of the team. And obviously Lacazette being on the score sheet is very nice to see. The second goal, Xhaka, who's been struggling in the eyes of the fans and the whole Arsenal community, really. I think, well struck free kick, and happy to see him in a positive light after so much, losing the captaincy and all the issues he's had. And then the third goal is a bit fortunate from Saka. I think obviously he's trying to pick out a cross there maybe, but ends up in the back of the net. And it should have been 4, and then he hit the crossbar. Chelsea just didn't look like they were in the mood, I guess, on the day. They never really seemed to create much and didn't pose a true threat on the Arsenal goal, I thought, throughout most of the game. So I was happy to see a strong performance from Arsenal, and unfortunately no clean sheet, but step in the right direction, and hopefully they can build on that.
Dre, let me push back on this.
Mm-hmm.
Pens and a mishit. I mean, I would say this was probably the luckiest win of the entire season and possibly the entire calendar year on this. I'm not sure that the result fully represented what the quality of the teams. But hey, sometimes the ball bounces a certain way and you got to take that because other days it's not. I mean, what's your take on that? Saying, well, Arsenal just got lucky in this game.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with it. I think when you look at all the goals, that they were a bit fortunate. But sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes you need that to kind of just add to the confidence and get the guys together and go in again. So, I mean, I don't think any of the goals in particular were well-crafted team goals or individual efforts, but the ball ends up in the back of the net, and it's 3 points at the end of the day. And I think they'll be happy with that, and they'll be building off that moving into the next game.
Yeah, to Arsenal's credit, they scored 3 goals against an XG of 2.13, and they did have 7 shots on target. So there's something to be said to that, while Chelsea had 2.55 and were only able to capitalize on 1. So I think there were some interesting pieces to that. Chelsea did do a heck of a job in terms of duels. They won 55% of the duels. And I think that's a useful statistic to give some sense, even though I think that tactically you would see why maybe Chelsea may be in that position. Harshal, what's your take on the match?
I completely agree that the goals were obviously, and I tweeted about this as well, that they were freak events in the sense that one's a penalty, the other's free kick into the top corner, and Saka, it's a mishit cross that goes in at the far post. But I mean, Arsenal did play a lot better than Chelsea on the night. Chelsea looked off the races physically. The stats may say that they won 55% of the duels, but I think they were completely off the pace in terms of their physical intensity. They weren't tracking runners. There wasn't enough space being covered. And this is off the ball. And on the ball, there wasn't enough movement. There wasn't enough, I'd say, imagination on the ball. And I mean, the fact that they went into the break 2-0 down, Frank Lampard made 2 changes at the break. One of them, I think, was actually a sort of, I wouldn't say a defensive change, but it was a necessity in that he brought on Jorginho for Kovacic. The reason being that earlier when it was Kovacic and Kante playing in midfield, Arsenal were able to absolutely make hay down their left and the Chelsea right, because there was no sort of support or defensive cover being, I wouldn't say cover, but there was no defensive support being offered to Reece James. So Saka, and if Emil Smith-Rowe was drifting out to the left, Bukayo Saka, Kieran Tierney, they were all able to absolutely, ravage down Chelsea's right-hand flank. And Lampard actually made that switch so that Jorginho then came into the base of midfield and Kante went out to the right of that three-man midfield also. So then there was a bit more protection given to Reece James. And I thought, and we've been crying out for Arsenal to play with a natural playmaker. They did that in this game with Emil Smith-Rowe, who started, I think it was only a second start in the Premier League. And his earlier start, his only other start, I think, was about a year or so ago, maybe. But he's 19 years old, I think, and he played really well. He linked midfield and attack, which has been one of the major problems with Arsenal, in the sense that there's not been enough connection between the midfield and attack. But playing with a natural playmaker in that role rather than a converted winger in Willian, for example, you could see the difference that makes. That Emil Smith-Rowe played really well. He was able to, and he was also drifting across the flanks. He was combining with Martinelli on the left, Saka, all these, and I thought that all three of them, Saka, Martinelli, and Smith-Rowe, played extremely well behind Lacazette. So we've been calling for Arteta to trust the youngsters. He did that to an extent in this game, and hopefully that'll continue, and we'll be able to see those guys sort of, if not drag Arsenal completely out of the mess, they should be able to provide enough energy and enough dynamism, I think, for the senior guys, then for the likes of Xhaka, Aubameyang when he comes back into the team, Lacazette, maybe even a Ceballos, Bellerin, all the experienced guys, they can then maybe also raise their levels and get Arsenal back to a more sort of recognizable position on the table. But yeah, I thought those three, Saka, Martinelli, and Smith-Rowe, played really well.
So I'm not the type to second guess managers' substitution decisions, but gosh, it would have been nice to see Giroud come in against Arsenal. I think he probably would have had a little extra powder, and it's just I'm going off that along with I just feel like there's a role for older strikers when you need to unpick a lock, give them a go. Though I will say Abraham had a magnificent game and he did score towards the end of the game. So you can't take anything away from that. And it was also really nice to see, defensively, what was going on with Chelsea, and the fact that Reece James and Chilwell, are doing very well in terms of being very forward and creating dangerous opportunities. They're both in the top 20 in terms of successful attacking actions per 90 amongst defenders. I felt that was probably an outcome that I guess it feels balanced now. I don't get the sense that the top teams are really are able to stick it to Liverpool and pick up some points. Trey, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's proven to be the difficult part. Obviously, Liverpool's been top for a while now in terms of, when they play Chelsea's, ManCity's, ManU's, whatever. That's really what they're going to have to figure that out, obviously. But at the end of the day, that's 6 points. I mean, they need to figure out how to beat most of the teams below them and really get their points from there. And then I think in the past, at least, it's been not losing to top six opposition and beating everyone else. That's really been, I guess, the formula for having success in the Premier League. So teams are starting to struggle with that a little bit, as we see they're, drawing with likes of Wolves and Everton and stuff like that, who aren't really considered top six teams. And when you start drawing and losing games like that, I think you're always going to fall off the pace and fall behind. But
right. Well, so I guess looking at some of the other matches, Fulham tied Southampton, which I think is a positive spot for Fulham, and a bit of disappointment for Southampton, obviously. Aston Villa dispatched Crystal Palace 3-0, even with a red card. And ManCity had a pretty just run-of-the-mill 2-0 game over Newcastle. Everton was able to squeak out 3 points with a 1-0 victory over Sheffield United. The Leeds United and Burnley game had some interesting elements to it. Harshal, can you help us unpack that game?
Obviously, there was a lot of focus on refereeing and again VAR and all of that in this game, and we can get into that later. But Leeds have struggled against teams which sit back in a low block this season, and I thought that was the case to a large extent in this game as well. I mean, yes, Mumford did score the penalty, but that's somewhat. I mean, I wouldn't have been surprised if this would have had there not been a penalty, I wouldn't have been surprised if this would have been a 0-0 game in that sense, because Burnley were actually quite solid, even though, they did let up, I think it was 10 or 11 shots in the game. There were only 4 of them which are on target from Leeds. They outshot Leeds, in fact. So it was just another example for me of the fact that I'm not saying that this is, and there has been a lot of debate around Leeds' playing style, and many sort of in the football community who haven't seen Leeds a lot over the last 2 years, and this is the first time that they're seeing Bielsa's sort of style of play. They believe that this is not the best way for them to play and that they'll get relegated, which I think is ridiculous, because, it's not as if people think that being pragmatic means being defensive. No, being pragmatic is just simply playing in a way that best suits the players at your disposal and also is the most sensible way for you to play. And given that Leeds have been under Bielsa for over 2 years now, given the fact that this squad has mainly been unchanged, like the core of the squad is the same as which he took over, so they've had a lot of time to assimilate his methods and his style of play, the physical demands it puts on the team. All of that is now ingrained into these players. So there's no point in them suddenly switching to a different style of play or going defensive or doing anything other than what they've been doing so far, because it's clearly it's worked. They've gone from a sort of mid-table championship side to winning the championship and coming up into the Premier League and competing with some of the biggest teams, right? So, for some reason, the critics were out after this game, after this particular Leeds-Burnley game, even though they picked up the win, in the sense that this is not sustainable and that they could get relegated if they don't tighten up and all of that. But I feel that this is exactly the way they need to keep playing. This is the style of play that is best suited to the team and to the manager. And they might, obviously, they're not a top 6, top 7 team. We will see them struggle in games. We will see them lose games, but I think they'll survive relegation comfortably. And that was probably the first and most important objective for the team. So, yeah, I think that'll happen.
So my take on the match was it was just an absolute mess is what it was. In the first half, in the beginning, you had Leeds in good form and doing their thing. But the second half was just mayhem. And interestingly enough, and I still haven't been able to figure this out, is that, Burnley got super front-footed where it's like, wait a minute, Burnley did not play the way Burnley plays, right? And Leeds did not play the way they normally play. I think that has to do more with sloppiness than anything else, or just general chaos. I do find it interesting. There's all this talk about Leeds and relegation, and Leeds is 4 points away from Chelsea, who spent 222 million over the transfer window. Leeds' budget is about 22 or 23 million in payroll total. So they're 19th out of 20. Sheffield United only has a smaller payroll, and they're at 11th in the league right now, or 11th or 12th, and they're 7 or 8 points away from the relegation line. So I feel that if I have, well, and we'll get into this later, if I have to watch games like what West Brom did against Liverpool, I'm not going to watch those games, right? Those are just dreadful, absolutely dreadful to watch. And at the end of the day, football is about entertainment. I feel like you have to win. And I know that Big Sam's got all the right incentives, and we can get into that. But what my take is I feel like Leeds, you're right. They need to stay true to their identity, and they eked out a win, given that they've tied ManCity. They've lost against all the other top six. They're 3-3 against mid-table teams, and they've won against teams that are ranked lower than they are. That to me sounds like a good recipe for a first year in the Premier League. So, Dre, you had some comments about general kind of the refereeing that was clearly, or many would argue that it's clearly a mistake. And as a former goalkeeper, I would say, yeah, that's probably a foul on the goalkeeper. You can't run in the air, knee someone in the back, then drop the ball. But fortunately, he had a good lucky whistle at the right time for Leeds, wrong time for Burnley. What's your take on that, Dre, and just generally kind of the state of officiating?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that situation, if you're playing for Burnley, you're always going to feel hard done by. I've watched it a few times over, and I don't see the issue. I don't see the foul there. But I think that's part of the game. As I've grown up, that's always been a part of the game. The referee's human, just like all the players on the field. Human errors involved in the game. That's always going to happen, and it's just something that you kind of live with. And I think now, with VAR in particular, like being introduced and being used in so many different ways, I think it interrupts the flow of the game sometimes. But I don't know. I don't know if it's worth. I mean, I see some offside calls and see some brilliant goals denied by a little line that's being drawn on the field, and that kind of it discourages me a little bit because, like you said, football's about entertainment, and sometimes maybe a guy's foot is offside, but that's just the way it works on that day. And as someone who plays, obviously you want the referee to get everything right in your favor, but you understand that that's never going to be the case. There's always going to be, a few decisions that go your way, a few decisions that don't. And I personally just preferred it that way as opposed to getting some of those to be quote unquote 100% right and some of those not. But I guess it's part of it now and just kind of have to deal with it.
Right. So I did want to mention briefly the West Ham Brighton game, which was 2-2, and I consider that almost a win for Brighton. Harshal, in the past, you've said they've been a bit hard done, or certainly the unluckiest as measured by XG. Any thoughts on that match?
I mean, you can still make a case for them being unlucky, but there's a point at which it stops being unlucky and it starts becoming your own inefficiency or your own inability to take those chances, right? Because yes, obviously there is a bit of luck involved in terms of scoring goals, but given the fact that you're creating chances and you're not taking them means that either your strikers are not good enough and they're not taking those chances, which is, I think, the case for Brighton because Neil Maupay is a very good forward, but he's not sort of, and I mean, you don't really expect Brighton to have an elite level centre forward because if they did, he'd have been bought by someone else by now. But Neil Maupay is a good forward, but he's not really made the jump yet to being a top class or even say a good Premier League centre forward yet. Danny Welbeck is good, but he's obviously past his best. He's not exactly the player he was even 5 years ago, 6 years ago or so. But and then if those are the guys leading the line, you can't really. I mean, I'm not surprised that they're not taking too many chances. But from West Ham's point of view, actually, we should be mentioning the fact that they've gone under the radar a little bit, although they are sort of seeing a bit of a blip in their results now over the last few games where they've lost a couple in the last 5. But before that, they actually picked up a few very good results and they were towards the top 6, top 7. They've dropped down to 10th at the moment in the table, but I think they're doing well. David Moyes is doing extremely well with the players he has at his disposal. There's been an injury to I believe it was Arthur Masuaku who's been injured now, which has So basically, West Ham were playing with a back three, with Aaron Cresswell playing as left centre back and Masuaku at left wing back, and that system was working really well for them. But because Masuaku's picked up an injury, he's had to go back to a back four, with Cresswell moving across to left back, and that may have coincided a little bit with the dip that they're seeing. I'm actually also really surprised that he's been playing Mark Noble at number 10 in the last few games, where West Ham are playing 4-2-3-1. And Mark Noble has barely got a kick in the league all of this season because Souček and Rice have formed such a good partnership in the West Ham midfield. But I don't really see Mark Noble as a number 10. I don't really see him as good enough for the league anymore, to be honest. And that's fair. He's 35, I guess. But I don't know why he's playing as number 10, to be honest. I don't know why Moyes is playing him there. He was never the most creative player. He's always played in deep lying midfield roles. So I'm going to look and see if he changes that, if he brings someone else in. But yeah, as you said, good point for Brighton because they hadn't been picking up points, even though they were playing well. And West Ham, I'd say they maybe got a little unlucky in the sense that because Brighton obviously equalized towards the end of the game. But yeah, both teams more or less where you'd expect them to be in the table right now, I guess.
Right. Trey, let's talk about Liverpool West Brom, where Klopp described West Brom's formation as a 6-4. What's it like playing against teams that really pack it in like that? And then what's your take on the game in general?
It's difficult. It's tough. Obviously, you want to have the ball, and you will have the ball in those games. But yeah, they make it very difficult to break them down and to create chances and to score goals. But at the end of the day, when you're a team like Liverpool and you do so well at home, or just in general, I don't think that you should expect anything different. I mean, teams are not going to come there and just be open for you to run through them and go score. So I'm not necessarily surprised, especially considering the position that West Brom is in, and they're looking for points, and they'll do whatever it takes to get them at this point. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit frustrating, but I think Liverpool's first goal was a well taken goal, and then they concede to a set piece again, which has been foiling a lot of the big teams recently. Chelsea's conceded to set pieces, Tottenham's conceded to set pieces as well. Everyone does it, but I'm saying those seem to be how they're conceding some of these crucial goals that they need to keep out. So yeah, I think West Brom came with a game plan, as most teams should, and they executed it how they would have imagined, and they left with a point.
Harshal, what's your take on the match?
I'd say this was I'm sorry, you'll need to I've completely lost my train of thought, Chris.
So Liverpool and West Brom, my take on it is it's unfortunate that we have to watch games like this. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. The incentives are totally for West Brom to stay up, and so they're incentivized to snag a point, even if that means keeping all 11 of your players underneath your own 30-yard line. Sam did exactly what he was advertised to do. Big Sam Allardyce, that is. And, Liverpool in the second half didn't seize its opportunities like it could have. They seem to have stepped their foot off the gas pedal. I am worried about the injury to Matip. It really is challenging the depth chart in ways that I don't know if it's ever been done or seen in terms of a top 6 team in the Premier League.
And yeah, in terms of, I'd say Matip, he's actually been quite injury prone. If you look at his career overall, even during his time at Liverpool, last season as well, he wasn't available for large chunks. He was not available for a while this season. He's come back and he's gotten injured again. He actually set up the goal, right? He stepped up from sort of defense and played that ball through to Mane, and they will struggle without him. But I think in the second half of the game, actually, West Brom were a lot. I mean, it's relative. They were completely defensive in the first half, but they became a little more attacking in the second half. They actually, I think, had more shots on target in the second half. And they were maybe pressing Liverpool a little bit more and a little bit higher up the pitch. And Liverpool weren't able to sort of cope with it. I wouldn't say cope with it, but they were not as fluent as maybe they were in the first half. So they probably drew the chances they got in the first half and they didn't take them. And West Brom were able to sort of get away on a counter and score a goal. And that's basically what you will get with Sam Allardyce, that ability to sit back and defend. And I mean, if you go away to Liverpool and you're open, you could concede 3 or 4 goals and the game could be over. But they just conceded 1 and they stayed in the game till about late in the game and they picked up a goal and picked up a point. And that's what Allardyce will do. He will keep you in games till late on. Well, I mean, it'll either be goalless or there'll just be a goal in it. And that always gives then your team, which is obviously in this case West Brom, it gives them the chance to pick up a point or maybe even pick up a win with a smash and grab like that. So I expect to see more displays like this, especially against the big teams. But I'll be interested to see how he plays against, say, the likes of Crystal Palace, the likes of Burnley, Newcastle, the other teams towards the bottom half of the table. But yeah, it's a good positive start for them, especially since they lost their first game under Allardyce last week.
Right. Dre, what's your take on the Wolves-Tottenham match?
Well, we've seen brilliance in their ability games and fight back. We've seen them trouble Tottenham again and tie 1-1. Maybe they were a little unfortunate not to win, in my opinion. Tottenham, they started well. They started really strong. I believe in Ndombele's goal was deflected, right? I think there's a little deflection on the shot going
it
through.
looked like it was a deflection, but it wasn't. It was a clean strike,
okay.
But he was unsighted. The keeper was basically unsighted.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, well, in that case, it's more of a well-taken goal than I initially imagined. But yeah, those are the games that we were talking about with Spurs in terms of how they'll play, whether or not they'll sit back against teams who like to do that themselves. And I think these two teams are teams that are probably going to compete for those 4th, 5th, and 6th spot in the Premier League, and they've both left for the point from this one, so nothing really to separate them there. But we'll just see how these teams continue to progress and push forward for the rest of the season. I don't really think there's anything that we can leave this game from with any new information, for example, about how they're going to go about their business.
Yeah, I have to say, I was just so impressed with Wolves. I don't know, I know that they've got a decent sized payroll, not huge, but they're always in that kind of Europa contention. So I think points per dollar, they have to be one of the best in the league. And it's the fact that they're doing this without Jimenez and good news, Jimenez it was able to visit, and that's a really positive step. And I'm amazed at how they're able to kind of keep it all together despite the difficult run. And a lot of times they're just 1-0 wins or 1-1 draws, and that's kind of. But that being said, the style of play is fun to watch. So really enjoy, and shout out to the Wolves. So
just to jump in on that, Chris.
Yeah,
just a little bit on Spurs there, because this again, as Dre mentioned, we've spoken about this earlier as well, where Spurs, I thought they got the early goal and they just sat back and they barely sort of tried to score another, and that's come back and haunted them now again for I think it's the 3rd game in a row. So they dropped points against Palace in a similar manner, and they actually lost the game against Liverpool because they didn't take. Although in that case it was a case of them not taking their chances. The other games it's been a case of them not really even trying to score a goal or trying to create chances. And if you sort of break it down, if you look at Spurs season so far, they scored 15 goals in their first 5 games in the league, which included that 6-1 win over United. They beat, I believe they beat Leicester, or they scored 5 against Leicester, if I'm not mistaken. I think the penny dropped with Mourinho in terms of this shift to a much more defensive tactic or lineup with that game against West Ham where they were leading 3-0 and they sort of conceded 3 goals in the last 10 minutes to draw 3-3. That was that last game of that 5-game run I spoke about where they scored 15 goals. In the 10 games since then, they've scored just 11 goals. So you can see that that's a huge drop off from going at 3 goals a game. You're going at just over a goal a game. So that, I think, is one of the biggest issues here, because I think Mourinho's sort of pulled up the handbrake a little bit. I mean, I think it's not necessary against teams like Wolves or Palace. Yes, understandable that you sit back against a Liverpool or even a ManCity, but you don't need to do that against teams like Palace or Wolves, and that's what is costing Spurs points. And that's what is, we were talking about Spurs being potential title challengers just about, I'd say, a month ago, and they've dropped off considerably since then. I'm not saying that they can't challenge, but they'll need to start winning these games if they want to challenge. And for that, they'll need to attack, because they have the players. You've got Kane, Son, you've got Steven Bergwijn, Lucas Moura can play games here and there. Eric Lamela's come back from injury. Dele Alli's on the bench. And then in midfield, you've got the likes of Lo Celso and Ndombele, who are brilliant in terms of creative output. So I think it's just a case of Mourinho needing to trust his team and maybe let them off the shackles a little bit if he wants them to compete for the title.
I don't think there's any competition for the title anymore, to be honest. I know it's early still, but I mean, when you look at the layout of the table, they're on 26 points. City and Villa are tied with them, and they both have a game in hand. Man U's above them with a game in hand. So I don't know. It looks a little bit. I mean, I imagine those teams will start to, kind of, well, maybe not Villa, but City and Man U will kind of stretch the gap a little bit. And I think Spurs is probably about where they'll end up.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with that. I mean, I think this is probably statistical noise, but of the folks in the top 6, Everton did win quietly. Aston Villa won, and Man City's in 8th, but they did win again. They're just a point off from being in the top 4. So, I've seen a lot of ties. There are 4 ties this weekend. It's Monday. We've got 2 more ties in the making. Kind of 6 ties in 3 days. There's going to be a fair bit of squad rotation. I wonder if finally we're kind of hitting the hangover period for the fast and furious football. Harshal, any notes on the league standings or this hangover where we're going to see some squad rotations and possible some dips in quality on the pitch?
Yeah, that's basically what I think we've been seeing as well, right? Earlier today, the Leicester Palace game, which also, as you said, was one of those games which was drawn. We saw a lot of rotation from both managers. Jamie Vardy didn't start, for example, for Leicester. A bunch of other players didn't play across both teams. Even for Chelsea, Aston Villa, which has just ended, and it's ended in another draw, 1-1. Villa didn't really rotate, and I'd argue that they've not really. I mean, I can understand that to an extent because they've actually played 2 games fewer than the other teams in the league, and they don't have European commitments, and they're not in the Carabao Cup and all of that. So they've not really maybe had as much of a physical load as the likes of Chelsea with European games and the various cup competitions. Chelsea did rotate. I do expect, as you said, teams will they definitely will need to rotate because they're playing 4 games of the space of 2 weeks or so, maybe, or a little more than that. So, especially given the fact that we've had a disrupted preseason and teams are already physically sort of behind where they should be at this time of the year, we will see rotation. And as you said, that will lead to a drop in quality to an extent on the pitch, which I think then could potentially lead to more draws, or if not draws, I'd say that don't be surprised if there is a shock result or 2 over the next 10 days, because that is bound to happen. Teams put out players who've not really played a lot with each other. There's cohesion takes a hit, and against some opponents that could be enough to give them a chance to score, and all of that can happen. So yeah, I think that's what's going to happen over the next 2 weeks or so.
So let's turn our attention to some upcoming matches in the next few days. Some matches of note. Relegation battlers Brighton playing against Arsenal. Dre, what's your take on what's going to happen in that game?
Well, hopefully, the hope is that Arsenal kind of builds from their last performance against Chelsea, and they go into the game confidently. And I think if they do so and they do what they're supposed to do, I believe they walk away with 3 points quite easily. Brighton's had some decent performances through the season, but like we mentioned earlier, they had been struggling to score some goals. So I think Arsenal will comfortably win that game, maybe 2-0.
2-0 Arsenal. Harshal, do you have an opinion on that?
I think obviously Arsenal will take a lot of confidence from that win over Chelsea, and it could be one that goes either way, to be honest, because yes, as I said, they will take confidence, but there's still a lot of work for Arsenal to do. I think if Mikel Arteta sticks with the team or the youngsters that he played with against Chelsea, that I think they should have enough to beat Brighton. But not by too much. I think it might be a 1-0 to Arsenal.
Yeah, my sense is it's going to be a 1-1 match. I am looking for Brighton to kind of regress to that proverbial mean and see what happens, and Arsenal to regress back to its proverbial mean, I suppose. Southampton, West Ham. Harshal, any thoughts on that match?
Southampton have, again, one of those who were sort of contending towards the top of the table or for Champions League spots and all that. And in fairness, it is quite tight below Liverpool, because it's 4 teams separating, 4 points separating second and ninth. Southampton are the team in ninth with 25 points. Leicester are second with 20. Sorry, Southampton are in ninth with 25 points, and Leicester are second with 29. So there's a 4-point gap between 7 teams there. So again, and to be honest, West Ham are just 3 points behind Southampton in the table. So Southampton are again probably going to be without Danny Ings. He got injured a couple of games ago, and the other guys have been stepping up in his absence, even as they did in his earlier injury-enforced absence. So Theo Walcott, Che Adams, Stuart Armstrong to an extent, Nathan Redmond to an extent, they've all stepped up and shared creative and goal-scoring burdens pretty well. So I'm expecting to see that continue. Although I will say that Southampton do have a very sort of fixed first 11 in that sense. Hasenhüttl doesn't really change around too often or too much. That's also to do with the fact that they don't have too many options, and there is an issue with squad depth. So I'm interested to see as to how that plays out over the next few games, because they will need to rotate. Otherwise, injuries are just around the corner. With regard to West Ham, as I said, they've been quietly sort of pretty good this year, this season, especially defensively, and that's a testament to David Moyes and his coaching, because under previous managers, West Ham were an absolute joke defensively. They were like a sieve, They would just keep giving up goals. So that side of things has improved. He's improved their goal scoring to an extent as well. So yeah, it'll be an interesting game. As the table says, they're pretty close to each other, so I expect that to play out as a draw. I don't know the scoreline, maybe 1-1, but I do think it'll probably be a draw.
Okay, so what do you think? 1-1, 2-2?
Maybe a 1-1, yeah.
Yeah, I suspect it's probably going to be a 1-1 match. I know that they had some Southampton had some injuries on Saturday with some of its key defenders. So I suspect that I can't imagine them coming back. Maybe they can. I just checked the injury wire and didn't see anything new. Dre, any thoughts? You want to put your hat in the ring on what you think the score of that game's going to be?
Yeah, I think I agree with the 1-1 shout. I think when we talk about this time period and the amount of fixtures and squad rotation, I think Southampton, for me, is one of those teams that will be hit hardest in terms of where they're competing in the Premier League right now, and the teams around them are probably they are more suited or better suited for this kind of time period because they have a lot more depth in their squads. So I think the likes of Southampton and Villa will probably struggle over the next week or two, and it'll be interesting to see how they make out in terms of their results. But yeah, I think 1-1 for this game.
Okay. What do we turn our attention to the Man United Wolves game? Harshal, how do you think that's going to unfold?
United, again, they've been putting together a decent run of form in the league. And even though, and I think now that you look at the table now, I think a point against Leicester is actually a decent result, even though when right after the game, there were a lot of people, and me personally as well, I thought United maybe should have won the game and that it was 2 points dropped. But in the context of the fact that Liverpool dropped points, Chelsea dropped points, City were the only sort of Spurs dropped points, and then City were the only one who picked up a win in terms of, if you would think, the traditional challengers for top 6. It was actually a good point gained, and I expect them to carry that form, or at least that sort of run of wins and draws, or that unbeaten run in the league against Wolves, because as much as, yes, Wolves have shown resilience and they are a very good team, they do lack something without Raul Jimenez in terms of a proper goal-scoring presence. And as much as Pedro Neto and Daniel Podence are huge prospects, they're not. I don't think it's fair to sort of expect them to carry the goal-scoring burden, and it certainly isn't from Fabio Silva, who's just 18 and in his first season in English football. So I do expect, obviously, the game to be close, that they'll compete, and Wolves have actually given United a bit of a tough time since they've been promoted in the games that they've played against each other. But United should probably just scrape this one. I'd say a 2-1 win for United.
Okay. Dre, what's your take on that one?
Yeah, I think given United's home form recently, and I've liked how Wolves have performed as well, but I think Man U just has more quality. They'll probably have more of the ball in this game, which I don't think will play to their strengths necessarily, but I'm predicting it'll probably be 1-1. Maybe somebody scores a winner in the last 5-10 minutes of the game. But yeah, I'll call 1-1.
1-1. I think it's going to be a 1-0 game, and I think I'll go Man United on that one. They just, the quality of the team and how emaciated Wolves are now, as much as I admire their pluck. So we'll see how that goes. There are some other games of note over the weekend to have though I'm not sure if they're going to happen. Chelsea, ManCity. We know that ManCity Everton match was canceled because of more positive COVID responses. So I would probably bet that game isn't going to happen, which is unfortunate because that was going to be really a nice anchor for a holiday weekend. And then we've got the Southampton-Liverpool match, which could have some fireworks to it. And it'd be interesting to see how Liverpool bounces back against a quality team after playing. They will play Newcastle on Wednesday. So I think we're going to leave it there, gentlemen. We are sponsored by the Premier League Guide, Moneyball for Football, Opposition Analysis plus Eye Candy. The current update is available at www.thinkingfanmedia.com and on Amazon. Join us for our next Thinking Fan podcast. For now, bella ciao, ciao ciao.